The wind had a way of singing on nights like this, long, mournful, almost human. It carried the kind of cold that didn't just sting the skin, but slipped beneath it, whispering into the bones that morning might never come. Calder Holt rode through that darkness with his hat pulled low and his coat pulled tight, the world around him a blur of drifting snow and faint moonlight. The prairie looked like an endless sheet of white sorrow, and his horse's hooves beat a slow, steady rhythm that echoed how tired his heart had grown over the years. He wasn't expecting to find anyone out there. Very few souls dared cross the plains in a storm like this. But then a sound, soft, fragile, barely carried by the wind. A cry, more breath than voice, the sound of someone nearly swallowed by winter. Calder stopped, listening. The wind shifted, carrying the faint plea again. He turned his horse toward the sound, guiding it through the growing drifts. And then he saw her, huddled beside a half-buried bush, arms wrapped around herself, dark hair coated in frost. She lifted her head with great effort. Her lips trembled violently, barely forming the words. "I'm freezing out here. Please let me inside." The sight of her hit him right in the center of his chest. A native woman, alone, stranded on the trail. Her clothes soaked, her breath shallow, one wrong moment away from going still altogether. Calder felt his pulse tighten, not just with worry, but with the heavy knowledge of what the town would say if they found her here. But none of those concerns mattered. Not a night like this. He slid off his horse, shrugging off his coat and draping it around her shoulders. She shivered under his touch, but didn't pull away. Her eyes held a quiet, exhausted fear, one he recognized too well. "Can you stand?" he asked softly. She nodded, but her legs wavered. Calder caught her before she fell, steadying her with an arm strong from years of working the land. She felt weightless, chilled to the bone. He lifted her onto the horse and climbed up behind her, guiding them slowly toward his cabin, just half a mile ahead. When he finally reached the small structure, half buried in the gathering snow, he pushed through the door with his shoulder and carried her inside. Warmth greeted them, soft firelight, the faint scent of pine logs, a room stripped down to essentials but clean and well cared for. Calder lowered her to the stool near the fireplace, brushing snow from her hair. She held trembling hands toward the flames, as if reaching for life itself. He crouched beside her. "You're safe here." For a moment, she didn't speak, only breathed, slow and shaking, letting the heat slowly revive her limbs. When she finally lifted her face, her eyes had softened, though the sorrow in them remained deep and old. Older than this storm, older than this night. "Thank you," she whispered. They would not let me stay. Any of them." Calder froze. "Who? People in the town," she murmured. "Barnes, Redden, even the woman at the church. They shut their doors on me. Some said I brought trouble. Others said the storm was my punishment, that I should move on." There was no bitterness in her voice, just an exhaustion so complete it sounded like surrender. Calder had known cruelty from townsfolk, too. Quiet cruelty, the kind that hid behind polite nods and long stares. He'd felt that same isolation when his family name fell under judgment years ago. Hearing her now rekindled an ache in him he thought he'd buried for good. He rose, stirred the fire, then ladled warm stew from the pot hanging over it. He set the bowl in front of her. She hesitated only a moment before eating with small, careful movements. While she ate, Calder used gentle words. "I'm Calderholt. What should I call you?" She paused, then answered quietly, "Iona Crowlight." The name felt like a whisper from the earth itself. Beautiful, untamed, carrying history. She ate until the warmth returned to her cheeks, then set the bowl aside. She studied his cabin. How simple it was, how peaceful compared to the angry winds outside. He noticed how her gaze softened at the sight of the small wooden carvings on his shelf. Tiny horses and shapes he carved when the nights grew long. "You live alone," she said softly. He shrugged. "Lonely suits some folks better than others." Her eyes lowered, thinking, "But not forever." Calder didn't answer. He didn't need to. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney like tiny stars. The room felt smaller, more intimate. The storm outside howled as if mourning while inside. Quiet surrounded them, soft and safe. Ayanna reached into the small pouch at her side and pulled out a piece of dried resin. She warmed it near the fire, softened it with her palms, and pressed it gently along the crack of a cup sitting on a shelf. Calder blinked. "You don't have to fix my things." Her voice remained soft, sincere. "Small repairs keep the heart steady. They remind us we can still mend something, even when we cannot mend ourselves." The words lodged deep inside him. He didn't realize how long he'd been watching her until she lifted her eyes and caught him staring. Embarrassed, he looked away, pretending to check the window. But the truth was something warm began to stir inside him. Not desire, not yet, but recognition. As if some wandering part of his soul had finally met another traveler. Later, when she felt steadier, she rose slowly. "I will go before dawn," she said. "I have troubled you enough." "You haven't troubled me at all." "But the town," she murmured. "They already rejected me. If they learn I'm here, it may bring trouble to your door." Calder turned fully toward her. "Let the town keep its gossip. I'll decide who freezes on my land." She looked away, clearly torn, caught between gratitude and fear of being a burden. Calder didn't push her. He simply added another log to the fire, letting the warmth speak for him. Outside, the storm intensified, snow hammering against the window in furious waves. Then, suddenly, a hard pounding shook the cabin door. Ayanna flinched. Calder stiffened. The knock came again, loud, authoritative, carrying the weight of a man used to being obeyed. A voice thundered over the roar of the wind. "Calder Holt, open up. We need to talk about the woman you're sheltering to." Calder's jaw tightened. Ayanna's eyes widened with fear, her breath trembling. He stepped toward the door with a slow, steady resolve, the fire casting long shadows across the wooden floor as he reached for the handle. And in that moment, the storm outside seemed to go silent, waiting. Marshal Bowen Tate entered first, his heavy boots thudding against the floorboards, sending small vibrations through the cabin. Snow clung to his coat, dripping onto the wooden planks. His eyes swept the room, sharp, calculating, suspicious. Behind him, the wind howled as if protesting his presence. Ayanna stood near the fire, her hands folded tightly together. Calder shifted to place himself between her and the marshal without thinking, his stance calm but immovable. Tate exhaled slowly. "Calder, you know why I'm here." Calder didn't look away. "You saw her in the storm. She would have died." "That's not the question," Tate replied, brushing frost from his mustache. "Town's in an uneasy place right now. Folks are stirred up. They don't want outsiders. Not after the scuffle last week." Ayanna lowered her gaze, the shame flickering briefly across her face like a shadow, trembling in firelight. Calder's voice remained even. "She's harmed no one. That's not for you to decide," Tate answered. He glanced at Ayanna again, and though there was no hatred in his eyes, there was caution, fear disguised as authority. Ayanna dared to speak, her voice quiet yet steady. "I asked only for a warm corner to survive the night. They shut their doors." Tate shifted uncomfortably, guilt pricking him, but the pressures of the town weighed on him more. "Look, keep her tonight. But come morning, the townsfolk will expect her gone. I can't hold them back if they ride up here." The warning lingered like smoke after a fire. Calder didn't answer. Tate looked between them one last time, nodded stiffly, and stepped back into the raging wind. The door closed with a dull thud, leaving the cabin wrapped again in its fragile warmth. The silence that followed was heavy, almost painful. Ayanna's breath shuddered as she pulled the blanket around herself tighter. "I do not want trouble to follow you," she whispered. "You didn't bring the trouble," Calder said. "They carry it in their own hearts." She blinked rapidly, as if trying to hold back tears she didn't want him to see. Calder moved to her side and gently draped a second blanket around her shoulders. Her fingers brushed his wrist, accidentally, softly, and both of them stilled. Neither pulled away. She stared into the fire, voice trembling. "My people used to say, winter reveals the truth of a soul. Some turn cruel when the cold comes. Others become guardians of warmth." Calder felt something settle inside him, a truth he hadn't put words to before. He didn't want her leaving at dawn, not because of obligation, but because the cabin felt different with her inside it. Less hollow, less haunted by old loneliness. They shared a simple supper. She hummed an old winter chant, low and rhythmic, filling the room like a prayer for endurance. Calder listened quietly, his hands resting on the table, absorbing every note as if it stitched something inside him. Later, she sat down to mend the leather of her moccasin, and he joined her on the floor, passing her tools when she needed them. It was the kind of closeness that didn't announce itself. But peace never lasted long in a town driven by fear. Near midnight, they heard voices outside. Faint at first, muffled by the wind, then louder. Calder rose, heart tightening. Ayanna looked toward the window. The flicker of torches glowed faintly across the snow. Shadows moved, a group of riders approaching the cabin with purpose. Silas Redden's voice carried clearly through the storm. Calder Holt, we know she's in there. Hand her over, and no one gets trouble. Ayanna's fingers dug into the blanket. This time, she didn't speak. She didn't plead. She simply looked at Calder, trusting him without needing assurance. Calder stepped to the door, opened it, and walked out onto the porch as the wind tore at his coat. Torches burned in the darkness. 4, maybe 5 men, all armed, all wearing their fear like armor. Silas spat into the snow. You take her in, you take on her curse. That's what folks say. Calder's voice was quiet, but it carried. Folks say a lot of things when they're afraid. She don't belong here, another man said. She's one of them. Calder cut him off. She's a woman caught in a storm. She asked for warmth. Any man with a heart would have given it. Silas scowled. Hand her over. Last warning. Calder didn't move. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't raise his voice. Silas, he said softly, if your conscience can stand leaving a woman to freeze, then ride on. But she will not take one step off my land tonight. Not while I'm standing. The wind roared, swirling snow around him like a veil of white fire. The men looked at each other, uncomfortable, uncertain. The strength of Calder's quiet conviction unnerved them. Not just his words, but the unwavering steadiness behind them. Ayanna stepped into the doorway behind him, wrapped in blankets, watching the scene with a calm she didn't have earlier. One by one, under the weight of their own shame, the men extinguished their torches and turned back into the night. When Silas finally rode off, the darkness swallowed him, leaving only the whisper of hooves fading into distance. Calder closed the door gently. The storm seemed softer now, less brutal. Ayanna approached him slowly, her steps cautious, her eyes shining. You risked yourself for me, she murmured. I stood for what was right, he answered. Anyone deserves warmth on a night like this. Ayanna reached out and touched his hand, this time intentionally. Her touch was small, but it carried a depth that neither of them had words for. They returned to the fire, sitting close, sharing the silence of people who no longer felt alone. Hours later, when the storm eased to a soft, steady snowfall, Ayanna looked into the flames and whispered, maybe winter does reveal truth. Tonight, I saw yours. Calder didn't speak. Instead, he stoked the fire, making it glow brighter. 2 wandering souls warming in the same light. And then comes the storyteller's voice, soft, aged, like a memory retold under starlight. Asterisk, if you ever find yourself walking through a cold season of your life, remember this. Warmth isn't something you stumble upon. It's something 2 hearts build, one small kindness at a time. And sometimes, the person you shelter becomes the one who shelters you back.